Good morning. A lot of very important things happening in the world. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We are here today to discuss Parshas Tetzaveh and Zachor, which is this week's obligation in addition to the regular Parsha. We read the last three sentences in Parshas Ki Seitzei. And of course, we always do that the Shabbos before Purim. So we'll be discussing Purim as well. The title for today's class is Getting in the Infinity Game. This month of Adar, is sponsored by Dr. Leonard and Marilyn Horowitz, with Aliyos Neshamos, his mother, Miriam Sarah Bas Aryeh Leib, her father, Harav Tzvi Akiva ben Harav Moshe Chaim, and grandparents Shlomo ben Chaim Yisroel and Sarah Bas Avraham Zalman HaKohen. May these parents and grandparents have tremendous benefit from their descendants and our collective Torah learning. Additionally, month of Adar is also dedicated to Aliyos Neshamos of special relatives, Moshe Aryeh ben Avraham Yosef, Hersh Mayer ben Moshe Aryeh, and Yitzchak Elchonon ben Chaim Yisroel. This week's class is also dedicated for Refu'ah Shlema, for Sarah Rivka bas Fryda, Perel, Sasha bas Meril Rivka, Shlomo ben Baila, Malka Sura bas Faiga Rachel, Simcha Isaac ben Etel Bluma, and Moshe ben Simcha. So I would like to start by pointing out what I think is very pertinent to current events, and that is a parallel between the unfolding Purim miracle and the post-October 7th 2 years of emerging events that are still happening today, as we seem to be on the precipice of a potential war with Iran. One of the incredible things about the Purim story is that all of the turnaround, which caused the Jews to establish the holiday of Purim and the tremendous celebrations and happiness that we have in the month of Adar, came not from unnatural miracles, that means things that defied the natural laws of physics, but rather it came from a miraculous set of circumstances that led to Esther and Mordechai as being the high-ranking members of Achashverosh's palace that they ultimately became, and the very self-inflicted damaging things that Haman did to himself in his manipulation of other people and his ultimate downfall. Now, in a similar fashion, one would look at all the post-October 6th events and say, well, it doesn't seem like there was a change of the laws of physics. It doesn't seem like, we saw God revealed explicitly, but certainly all the incredible circumstances that led to the amazing victories of the 12-Day War and Hezbollah and Syria and so many things that are too numerous to mention. And that too should yield something similar to the happiness and the celebration that we experienced in the post-Purim events. So I just wanted to point that out. I think it's an important parallel, and I think many of us are not really focused on that. Now, all of this is made even more incredible in terms of divine providence and what seems to be divine machinations of world events, is that obviously we're possibly at war with the very same Persia that is the subject of the Purim story. Now, whether or not it's the same exact ideology, that could be the subject for a different time, but it's rather incredible that here we are, the week before Purim, and the situation in front of us is incredible in that we are possibly going to go to this war, possibly we are going to not go to this war, but regardless, we hopefully are going to emerge even stronger over the nemesis that is the anti-Semitic regime that is currently in charge of Persia. Okay, so that's introduction point number one. Obviously, from all of that, we should ask, what can we learn from the Purim story that can help us better move forward so that we can have some of that incredible celebration and rejoicing that the Megillah itself describes post-Purim, so that we too, this year, can also come close to some level of joy and ecstasy that was very clearly the case as the Megillah says, "LaYehudim ha'isa ora v'simcha v'sasum v'ikar." The Jews had light and happiness and rejoicing and glory, dignity. So hopefully we can somehow also experience that in this, what I'm calling a parallel situation today with the Purim of yesteryear. Also important is how can we help our nation to develop a better organization of collective responsiveness and ultimate direction as a people? Because clearly there was a really good amount of collective Jewish organization in the aftermath of the decree against the Jews. Mordechai and Esther were able to get all the Jews of Shushan to fully participate in fasting and in praying for 3 days straight. And across the world, the Jews definitely responded in a collective fashion. As the Megillah itself points out, the Jews gathered together to fight the war of the 13th of Adar that year. So similar to then, we also need to do something about getting a better organization so that we can, as a collective group and nation, respond on behalf of our people with more clear direction and actions. So I'd like to, for that purpose, just focus on the last sentence in the Megillah, and then we're going to get straight to our Parsha. So the very last sentence of Megillah Esther says, Ki Mordechai ha-Yehudi mishneh lamelech Achashverosh. Mordechai, the Yehudi, was second in command to King Ahashverosh, v'gadol la-Yehudim, and he was great for the Jews. Either it means great among the Jews, or if he was a tremendous benefit to the Jews. V'ratzui l'rov achav, and he was well thought of, or he was acceptable to most of his brethren. Doresh tov la'amo, he sought the good for his nation. V'dover shalom l'chol zaro, and he spoke harmony, or for peace, for all of his offspring. So just on that last sentence, that last phrase, I just want to point out that probably when it says that Mordechai was Doresh Tov le'amo, it means for his whole nation he sought good things for them. V'dover shalom l'chol zaron, for all of the children of that nation, he also sought shalom and spoke of shalom for all of them. So the question is, what does this pasuk mean? That Mordechai was great? Mordechai was great. What is the Megillah teaching us by saying he was second in command to the king, he was good for the Jews, most of the Jews liked him, but not all of them, and he sought to do what was good for his nation and shalom for all of his offspring? Why is that the concluding sentence of Megillah Esther, and what's it really telling us? That Mordechai wanted to do well for the Jews? What are we supposed to learn from that? Okay, so now let's go straight to the Parsha. There's a very interesting commentary that is the Sforno, and we're going to mention his idea here just to get us started. The Torah begins with the word ve'ata, and you. And specifically and pointedly, the Torah does not mention the name of Moshe Rabbeinu, and there's a comment in the Baila Turim that this is a very standalone parsha in that Moshe's name is not mentioned. And there's a reason for that, because Moshe said to Hashem when he prayed for the Jewish people, listen, forgive them. This was after the sin of the golden calf. Forgive them, and if not, erase me from the book that you wrote. Because Moshe said, erase me from the book that you wrote, if you do not forgive the Jewish people, he was given this kind of consequence that his name would not be mentioned in this parsha. We've spoken about that in years past, but really I'm just coming mostly to make the point that it does not mention the name Moshe. It mentions the word ve'ata and you. Now, tangentially, we'll probably discuss this point of Moshe's proper name not being included in this parsha, meaning the proper noun name. But now let's focus on the word ve'ata. Says the Sforno that, interestingly enough, we did the whole Parshas Truma, and in Parshas Truma, Hashem was speaking to Moshe, as the first pasuk says, Hashem speaks to Moshe, but it never uses the word ve'ata and you, referring to Moshe. Instead, it just adds a taf to the end of the verbs. For example, ve'asisa shulchan, ve'asisa chaporos. You should make the shulchan, you should make the chaporos, right? You should make all the things of the Mishkan, and it always says you, ve'asisa, you should make the menorah, V'asa mishkan ta'asa, you should make the mishkan, but it does not actually use the word ve'ata. It uses the suffix or prefix of the taf to express the word you. Here in Parshas Tetzaveh, the word ve'ata is mentioned 3 times in the first 2 paragraphs. Ve'ata, you should command the Jewish people, and they should take for you olive oil for the lighting of the menorah. That's the first one. The second one is ve'ata hakri ve'lecha, and you should bring close to you Aharon, your brother, and his children to become Kohanim. That's the second ve'ata. You bring them close to you to make them Kohanim. And the third one is you should speak to the wise-hearted men that I have filled with wisdom, and they should make the clothing of Aharon. Now, the Sforno learns that that sentence is not only referring to the wise men that made the clothing, it's referring to speaking to all the wise men that made all the implements of the Mishkan. You, Moshe, should speak to them. So says the Sforno, why does the Torah use the word ve'ata over here? Because the Sforno suggests, and this is the pshat, the explanation that we're going to go with today, because everything else that Moshe did in the Mishkan, everything that was mentioned in Teruma, whether it's the Shulchan, the table, the Aron, the Ark, the Menorah, the candelabra, all of those things Moshe could delegate. He did not need to do the crafting of these instruments, the crafting or the weaving of the fabrics, of the materials of the Mishkan, making them into curtains, etc. He could, yes, delegate that. He did not need to do it himself. But these 3 things, that is the beginning of our Parsha, Moshe needed to do them himself. What are these 3 things? That the Jewish people should bring the olive oil to you, Moshe Rabbeinu. You yourself should get the olive oil from them to you for the candelabra. Moshe had to do that himself. And Moshe had to himself bring close Aharon and his brother, and Aaron's children to establish them to be the Kohanim. And Moshe himself had to instruct all the craftsmen about what they should do. He couldn't delegate the instructions to one person and say, hey, now you go tell everybody else. No, Moshe himself needed to give the instructions directly to the craftsman himself. That's the way the Sforno learns the word ve'ata. And now my question is very simply, okay, great, that's a very excellent pshat reading of the psukim, of the sentences, but why? Why should it be that Moshe himself has to get the olive oil for the menorah? Moshe himself has to bring Aaron close to him instead of having other people bring Aaron and his children close to Moshe. And Moshe himself has to give the instructions to the craftsman. Okay, why should these 3 things require Moshe himself and delegation of these tasks not be allowed? Why is that? So that's our first question. Question number 2, we're going to, give me, sorry, 1 second. Yeah, question number 2. What does it mean that Moshe needs to bring Aaron and his sons close to him? What does that mean? He's supposed to hug them? What's the Torah trying to convey? I understand, you, Moshe, have to tell them yourselves, hey, come, you have to be Kohanim. But why hakrev elecha, bring them close to you? What does that mean? You want to tell me convince them? You want to tell me encourage them? What's the idea of bringing them close to Moshe? That's question number 2. Question number 3, a Parshas Zachor question, which is very interesting. There is a question in the commentaries that the mitzvah that we have, which is what we are partially reading in Parshas Amalek, the mitzvah to wipe out the nation of Amalek, there is a halachic question if that mitzvah could apply nowadays. I think the general accepted understanding of the Rambam is that it does not. It requires that we have a king and that we get back into Eretz Yisrael, but there is no mitzvah even on an individual nowadays. This is the way the Sefer Yereim understands. Seemingly also other people understand the Rambam, Maimonides this way, that in the future, as a collective nation, when we have a king, we will go to a collective war against the people of Amalek. Now, there are many other details that we're not going to get into now. But it means it does not apply today. But according to the chinuch that says that in theory this mitzvah could even apply today, even to an individual, why is it that the Torah specifically frames it that it's only after we have Eretz Yisrael, after we have rest from all of our enemies, that then we have a commandment to wipe out Amalek? If it's true that it's only when we have a commandment called getting Eretz Yisrael, or I should say a situation, not a commandment, only have a situation called having Eretz Yisrael and having respite from all of our enemies around us, that's when we have the obligation of destroying Amalek. So how do we have the mitzvah today? That's a very difficult question. But mostly, I just want to ask the question of why should it in fact be not that way, let's say according to the Rambam. If there is a mitzvah only then, why should it be only then? Why can't it be that, look, Amalek is a bad nation, they did a terrible thing to you, and you have to know that you can't tolerate that, and you have to wipe them out? Why should it only be when we have a king, when we have respite from all of our enemies around us, that then we have a commandment to wipe out Amalek and not earlier, as per Maimonides? So those are the questions that we're going to deal with. Just in general, applying the lessons of Purim to our situation today. How can we help ourselves understand what we need to do better or different? How to get that kind of joy and that celebration that occurred at the time of Purim? That's question number one. Question number two is this last sentence in the Megillah, which talks about Mordechai the Yehudi being second in command, and he sought peace and good for all of the children of the Jewish people. What is the import? What is that sentence really coming to teach us? That Mordechai was a good guy? That's the last sentence. We know he was a good guy. The whole miracle happened through him and Esther. So what's the Megillah coming to teach us? Then why do we have, specifically as per the Seforno, Moshe Rabbeinu himself needing to get the oil for the menorah and from the Jewish people, and Moshe himself bringing close Aharon and his children? And then number three, Moshe himself giving the instructions of everything for the Mishkan. Why does it have to be that those three things cannot be delegated? So I'd like to begin with understanding the central figure of the Torah that is Moshe Rabbeinu, and also why these Parshios that we're learning everything about the Mishkan, why they are so relevant today, even though it seems like it was only relevant to the specific structure called the tabernacle, and only until we had the first temple, and then that seemingly became obsolete. I'd like to glean some lessons for ourselves that, no, all of these teachings are very relevant even now, even today, when we have no Beis HaMikdash and no Mishkan, and that revolves around understanding Moshe Rabbeinu as this central figure of the Jewish people. So first, just to begin our explanation, we need to recognize that it's a hard concept to fully integrate into our mental processing, but we need to try at least a little bit, because the whole point of existence is not temporary, it's infinite. And for anybody who thinks that their life is truly finite and that their existence is not infinite, it's a sad and nihilistic day indeed. And unfortunately, because so many people across the world have taken that as kind of a reality, the fact is that a lot of people are not happy, and they try to live a life where they satisfy their, need to feel good with various pleasures and luxuries and pursuits of power or money and other things like that, when the reality is that that's never going to bring happiness. And a lot of people, therefore, need a lot of medication or drugs or other things just to get through the day. That's the sad truth. So therefore, it's very important to process this idea that human beings are meant to be actually infinite. And despite the fact that there is death in the world, and despite the fact that we haven't had a resurrection of the dead, we nonetheless know that that will be the future. And so therefore, we should understand what it means a little bit to be in connection with the idea of the infinite. But let me just say from the outset, before we do any more philosophy, Moshe Rabbeinu, in a very real sense, achieved an infinity while he was alive. And what I mean by that is a standalone feature of Moshe Rabbeinu, our teacher Moshe, that no other Jew ever had, was a commandment from Hashem to not go back to his wife after Mount Sinai and not go back to his tent, not go back to normal home living. Moshe Rabbeinu was the only Jew that Hashem said, okay, you cannot be married. But on the other hand, Hashem did say, the rest of you Jews go back to your tents, go back to normal, so to speak, living. Now, the Torah says that human beings are meant to procreate and have children, and marriage is a part of that. But it did not exist for Moshe Rabbeinu after Mount Sinai. So that is an anomaly that we need to understand. But just know that the way that Moshe Rabbeinu is taught that is in Parshas Ve'eschanan, after the Jewish people said, hey, we cannot communicate directly with Hashem when they were blown away by the events of Sinai. They said, you, Moshe Rabbeinu, speak on our behalf. So Hashem said, great, we'll listen to them. Tell them that they should go back to their tents and back to their home life after the Mount Sinai event. The Ata, and you, Moshe Rabbeinu, Po Amod Imadi. Here you should stand with me. That was the word that Hashem used to introduce to Moshe that he was going to stay with Hashem. The Ata, and you, which means that Moshe had a standalone existence different from the rest of the Jewish people post the Mount Sinai event. But let me bring you another proof to the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was very different. It's called that Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai for 120 days on which he did not eat or drink for 120 days. Now, obviously that's a miracle. But my suggestion to you today is not just that it's a miracle that Hashem allowed him to survive. The real miracle is that Moshe Rabbeinu had transformed himself to such an extent that he did not need to eat or drink. That even though he walked around on planet Earth among the other humans, Moshe Rabbeinu was actually living already an angelic existence while he was alive. And I would even go so far as to say that for the rest of his life, just like he was not married for the rest of his life, which is a normal human need and reality, so too, he did not need to eat or drink for the rest of his life. That would be my suggestion. And a little bit you could see that from the fact that he had this incredible shine on his face and that the people were actually fearful to approach him. And that happens right post the Mount Sinai 120 days. So my point is that Moshe Rabbeinu is the ultimate representation of connecting to the infinite here in this world, and that the Jews, all of us Jews, need to be reminded all the time that that's the level that we are meant to be striving. So even though after Hashem gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai, we said we don't want to communicate with Hashem directly. We want you, Moshe Rabbeinu, to communicate instead. And that ultimately that leads to the prophets of the generations, etc. That should not be our goal. Our goal should be to try to get ourselves to the level that we're able to be in a direct communication with Hashem. And even though that's not going to happen in our lifetime, that is what being part of the infinite really means. To being able to have that one-on-one, face-to-face communication with Hashem. Yes, we chose to not be capable of that after Mount Sinai. We had a hard time getting ourselves up to that level of transformation. Yes, Moshe Rabbeinu was able to do that, and Moshe Rabbeinu was able to live that reality even post the Sinai experience, even after the sin of the golden calf. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to exist on that level. But we Jews need to always be reminded that that is where we are aiming, because the truth is that that's the only way to really be part of the infinite. Because being part of the infinite means being part of Hashem's universe, being part of a transformation that will always be in the presence of Hashem, with Hashem's monarchy being clear, like we say in our davening, and conclude every Aleinu, on that day Hashem will be one and His name will be one. We know that we're going to live a truth where it will be completely inescapable that Hashem's monarchy is complete, His presence is here and palpable, and that is what we will be focused on. And therefore we will be able to communicate with Him on that level, because we will have properly transformed ourselves to being capable of that, and that's part of the ultimate future. But we need to always have that as a target, and we need to commit to that as much as we can, even though it's very difficult. Now let me give an answer to a question that I know bothers all of us, and that is, and it was mentioned even a week or two ago, that is that the Jewish people experienced Hashem directly at Mount Sinai. Hashem directly, and all the miracles of Egypt, and all the miracles of the Red Sea, and they had a communication that they knew was 100% Hashem, and they still chose to do the golden calf. That is really, really problematic. How could such a thing be? How could they fall so fast and so far? And my answer is very simple, but I want to give a mundane sort of example to illustrate it. Most of us think that what makes serving Hashem, following the mitzvahs or the Torah, davening so difficult is, on some level, we might have doubt as to either the existence of Hashem, or how much is Hashem really listening to us or paying attention to us, or how much does Hashem care, right? Those are the general kind of misgivings that I think many people have when it comes to processing being fully committed and into a relationship with Hashem. But I suggest that that's not true at all. That is not what is holding people back. It is not doubt that holds people back. It is not a disbelief in Hashem listening or Hashem caring. No, it's not that. It's a much different reality. And unfortunately, I would say a little more uncomfortable to face. Most good people know that it is a fabulous use of their time to spend time with their children and build even more enduring, meaningful, and fulfilling relationships with their children or their spouses. Most people know that to be true. And they even experience it. They know they're in a relationship with them, but they do not give it the proper time, care, consideration, analysis, attention that it deserves for their own good, not to mention for the good of the spouse or for the children. So why? Why are people not doing that? Here's a completely different example. Instead of talking about Hashem, we're talking about a relationship with human beings that everybody knows is real, everybody knows is true, and everybody experiences it even as good when they put in time and effort. But I think nobody would say they're giving it all the time and attention that it deserves. Why? Because we're selfish. That's why. Because it's hard. Because it's not always easy. Because it's not immediately fulfilling. Because it requires me to think about things that I don't want to think about. Because it doesn't allow me to just take it easy and veg out. Simple. That is why. Now, take a calculator, put as many digits as you can, and maximize them and exponential, factors. It's all the more so in terms of a relationship with Hashem. But it has nothing to do with being aware of the truth that Hashem exists, or being aware of that Hashem really wants what's good for us, and that listening to Him is actually a good idea. It has nothing to do with that. It's just that it's hard, and we don't want to give it the time and attention that it deserves. Very simple. So here's the key word that we have to remember, and it's a word that's been used for millennia. But unfortunately, I think it's been depicted in the wrong ways. The word is service. To serve means to be in the pursuit of working to get closer and more bonded with one's guide, master, teacher. That's what to serve really means. And to serve means to be in service to, which means to work really hard, which is why the word Kohen, which means a servant, is connected with the word avoda, meaning the Kohen does the avoda. They both mean serve, service, work, effort. That's what it means. It's hard to be a lifetime servant. It's really difficult. So my very simple suggestion is that if a person really wants to get into the infinity game, they need to commit to being a servant as much as possible, to be in the service of the infinite, the service of Hashem, the service of Hashem's people. And you know what's a really good example of being in the service? Obviously, we think of Kohen. Even a melech is really in the service of Hashem's kingship. Those are simple examples. But a really good example is a man by the name of Mordechai that had a wife who was also his cousin named Esther. He gives her up so that she can go beg to Achashverosh for the destiny of the Jewish people. He gives her up so that she might be of service one day in the palace of the king. And when her time comes and she's not so clearly willing, Mordechai says, who knows if this is the reason that you reached the position of the kingship? And by the way, if you don't step up to serve, Hashem will find someone else that will serve. And then, after all is over and the decree is thwarted, and respite and salvation and rejoicing is true for the Jews, you know how Mordechai lives his life? In service. He's the second in command to the king Achashverosh, and he's advocating for the Jews, doing whatever he can, Gadol HaYehudim, even though, guess what? Not all the Jews are happy with him. The pasuk says, "V'ratzoi l'rovachav," and he's liked by most of his brethren. Not all of them. But that doesn't stop him from seeking good for his whole nation and speaking and advocating for the future generations of all his people. Mordechai is living a life of complete service. And guess what? Part of what we read on when we read the Megillah, the sentences that everybody repeats is when Mordechai HaYehudi, he goes out in royal clothing because he's achieved royalty. Most of us, when we read that pasuk, I think we're thinking he's a royal officer in the palace of Achashverosh, because that's probably where the clothing came from. But I would suggest that what the Megillah is really talking about is the royalty of being in service to Hashem and Hashem's mission. Now, it happens to be that his ancestor, Binyamin, given also extra clothing by Yosef, Binyamin also was in service to the mission of the Jewish people. The rabbis tell us that he never revealed his knowledge at all about Yosef being sold. That wasn't his mission, and he was in very big mourning for not being able to live life together with Yosef, but he kept his mouth quiet. That's why the name of the stone that we read about in this week's Parsha is Yashpeh, that he had a mouth that he could speak, but he didn't speak. That kind of service is royalty. And in fact, Binyamin has the first king of the Jewish people, that is Shaul HaMelech. But the point is that the ultimate example of the ultimate servant of Hashem and of what it means to be in service to the infinite, that example is Moshe Rabbeinu. Says our Parsha, you, Moshe Rabbeinu, and you yourself, you have to be the one to gather the oil for the light of the menorah, because ultimately the goal of being service to the infinite is that the light of Hashem should light up the world, like we talk about based on Pasuk and Yeshaya, that the Jewish people are a light to all the nations. The light of the menorah represents the fact that the infinite, that is Hashem, and which is always represented by light, is going to light up the world. And that is going to be an infinite light, which is why the first light that was created was the light of the ultimate infinite future. That's what light is. Light is to give us wisdom and understanding and amazing transformation ability. Moshe Rabbeinu is the key ingredient that can bring about the infinite impact of the Torah and the light of the Torah to the world, and therefore Moshe Rabbeinu has to be the one to gather the oil of the menorah, which represents the light of the Holy of Holies coming out to light up the world. The Gemara even says, by the way, that when they lit the menorah in Yerushalayim, all the courtyards of Yerushalayim would be filled with light. From the light of the menorah, all of the courtyards of Yerushalayim would be lit up. That's the idea of the infinite coming and expanding into the ability to, and having the ability to light up the world. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu himself needs to bring Aharon and Aharon's brothers close to him, because Moshe Rabbeinu is the source of the glory of the Kohen Gadol, of the glory of the Leviim. Moshe Rabbeinu is the source of that, so they need to come close to him. He's the one that represents the light of Hashem with his shining countenance. He's the one that's in direct communication, because the Jewish people said, you speak to Hashem on our behalf. And the extension of the monarchy of Hashem and the light of Hashem requires the ultimate service. And you know who the ultimate servant is? Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the most humble person that ever lived. Moshe Rabbeinu is different. His prophecy is different. He's my servant. He is my servant, and he is more faithful than any other servant. Moshe's humility, Moshe's service means that he is the ultimate one to bring out the light of the infinite into the world. And that's why it is Moshe himself who has to clearly explain the instructions of how to build the palace of Hashem, which is the Mishkan. He is the one to give the instructions to all those that are wise-hearted. Wise-hearted, by the way, means always. Wisdom means having awe of Hashem, Yiras Hashem. Moshe Rabbeinu is the one to instruct them, because they have to connect to him and to the light that comes from him and to his awareness of Hashem. He's being the most humble. He has the most Yiras Hashem of anyone. And therefore, these three things in particular are Moshe Rabbeinu. But why is the word ve'ata? Because that's the word that Hashem said after Har Sinai. If the Jewish people are choosing to not communicate with me directly, and you, Moshe, are going to choose to be the one, the emissary between me and the Jewish people, and you, Moshe Rabbeinu, stand with me, you have to be on call to me. You are no longer a regular human being. You are transforming now into a kind of infinity that requires you to not be married. It also determines that you will not need to eat or drink anymore. That is ve'ata, and that's why it's this word that's repeated here 3 times at the beginning of Parshas, ve'ata tetzaveh. But the point is that we should want to communicate with Hashem directly. And if we can't, it means we have to get as close as we can to Moshe Rabbeinu. And that's why when Moshe Rabbeinu came down on Yom Kippur, he taught the Torah first to Aharon, and then to Aharon and his children, and then to Aharon and his children and the 70 elders. That's the hierarchy. The more communication you have with Moshe Rabbeinu, the closer you are to Hashem. So Aharon is the most, and Aharon's children is second most. And the Zakanim, which are the scholars, are the third most. Now, we might think that we Jewish people today have no connection to that, but guess what? We have Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day when we're trying to transform ourselves, even momentarily, for a 25-hour period, to be angelic, to be transforming ourselves, to live in that space. And it's built on a Rosh Hashanah that recognizes the monarchy of Hashem, and it's built on Yom Kippur, which recognizes the need for our self-introspection and our self-improvement, and ultimately our self-transformation. That is what's happening on Yom Kippur. That's a little bit how we get there. Who's the main character of Yom Kippur? The Kohen Gadol, right? He's doing the service in the Holy of Holies. He's wearing the clothing. It's all about getting into the infinity game, Yes, we know that we're not going to feel infinite today. Yes, we know that it's hard to find the people that are this kind of servant, the Mordechai kind of servant, the Moshe Rabbeinu kind of servant, the Esther kind of servant. It's very, very difficult. But to whatever extent we can, we need to grasp it, and we need to grab onto it, and we need to get closer to it, and we need to submit to the oneness of Hashem. Now, the one nation that cannot tolerate this message is Amalek. And that's why the emphasis of what Amalek did wrong was when the whole world knew that Hashem is king, as we say in the Az Yashir. Everybody was terrified of the Jewish people. And we talk about Hashem Yimloch Leolam Va'ed. The miracles of the Yam Suf, the whole world became completely riveted and focused on the monarchy of Hashem. The one to challenge that was Amalek. So therefore the Torah says, remember what Amalek did to you on the way out of Egypt. What is on the way out of Egypt? After the 10 plagues, post the miracle of the Red Sea, Amalek comes to counter and to attack the idea of Hashem's monarchy, which is why the end of Parshas B'Shalach says that Hashem's throne is not complete as long as Amalek exists, and there's an eternal war against Amalek until their ultimate decimation. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu is the one to stand against Amalek. That's why Haman thinks, oh, we can kill the Jews in Adar when Moshe Rabbeinu dies. Little does he know, it's also when Moshe Rabbeinu is born. It's also why this infinity factor, many Chevra Kadishas, right, the Jewish ritual burial committees, they make their annual events on the yahrzeit of Moshe Rabbeinu, on Zayin Adar, because that's also an antidote to the feelings of mortality and to the ultimate kind of depression that sets in when people feel that their lives are finite. Moshe Rabbeinu reminds us, no, the life is infinite. And the Torah that he taught us is what really connects us to the infinite. So for us today, the most important thing, if we want to connect to the celebration of Purim, if we want to truly connect to the light and to the dignity that the Jewish people were feeling post-Purim, it's to connect to a life of service, which is the exact opposite of what most of the world is trying to encourage people to think. Most of the world encourages people to think about themselves and to focus on themselves and to do for themselves everything about self, very little about the infinite and being in service. In order to actually get the transformation and the elevation that was experienced by the Jews post-Purim, we have to get into service. You think Mordechai wanted to be the second in command to the king Achashverosh? You think he wanted to spend his life doing that? You think he wanted to be in the limelight? You think he wanted to not be fully appreciated by all of his fellow brethren after everything he did for them? Probably that didn't feel so good. But you know what? Despite all that, how does the Megillah conclude? Doresh tov le'amo v'dover shalom l'chol zaro. You want to know how to step into service? Do that. Seek what is good for the Jewish nation. Speak what is going to bring harmony to all the posterity, to all the next generations. Establish the places of learning. Establish the places of davening. Establish the places that will really help Jews to understand their roles of service in the world and the ultimate mission of Hashem in the world, and then you can have a similar elevation of royal bearing like Mordechai and Esther. That is ultimately how to step into the infinity game. And we have to remember that, okay, we don't have a Mishkan today, we don't have the Kohanim in the way that we have, we don't have the service, but we do have the sense of connection that can come from a life of service, which is a life of transformation, and it's a lot of work. And it's true, it's not easy. And it's true that it requires getting up off the couch and putting down technology and getting involved in, real conversations of responsibility and hard work. But that's where the infinity game begins, and that's where ultimately the salvation of the future is going to come including the utter destruction of Amalek. So really the reason that the Torah says it will be when Hashem gives you rest from all your enemies and you have Eretz Yisrael, that then you destroy Amalek, because there's no way to have a complete monarchy of Hashem without having Eretz Yisrael and without having a king. We're never going to have a complete, palpable recognition of ourselves in the world, that Hashem is the one king, without that. When we have that, then we can finally conquer Amalek. So whether or not there's a mitzvah today, we have to understand that the real goal is not getting rid of Amalek. The real goal is establishing the monarchy of Hashem and our buying in to the infinity journey, which means being in service to Hashem's oneness and his mission. Any questions or comments?
Thanks, Akiva. Good class. Good class. See you next week.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. See you next week. Yes, Mrs. Kanoff, please unmute. Please unmute.
Okay, it's not directly the same thing, but it reminds me of when I was a little girl and I didn't have the capacity to take in a beautifully nuanced and, shir like this. My father, when I would be jealous of people that seemed to be getting more fawned over, more whatever, who seemed to have more advantages or whatever. And he said it in Yiddish, and so much more interesting in Yiddish, but I can't repeat it in Yiddish, unfortunately. He said, look, there are two kinds of horses in this world. There is the show horse and there is the workhorse. And He said, everybody thinks they want to be the show horse with the ribbons and the thing, and everybody's fussing over them and then fawning over them. But at the end of the day, they're always looking for the other show. But if you're the workhorse, you're never looking for another job, because there's always another job. You're always busy. You're always working. There's always something to do. So it's a very, very, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a nuance. It's not articulate. It's not, but I think maybe it prepared me as a young girl for what it is you're saying now in such a layered and articulate way.
Wow, that's really a great story. I really appreciate that. Amazing chinuch.
Yeah, no, it's true. So I was raised to be the workhorse, and I think it served me well.
I'm sure that means you're serving well.
Okay.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. I believe my father is giving a class today. I'm just somebody who's asking me. Okay, perfect. Okay.
Thank you very, very much, and have a wonderful Purim.
You too. Wonderful Purim, everyone. Have a great day, everybody.